The whispers fell silent as the mahogany casket lowered into the ground. "What a waste," my uncle muttered, not quite under his breath. "All that money, all those degrees. And what did she leave behind? Nothing but an empty house, and a bunch of old books." I stood motionless, watching as they buried my Aunt Eleanor, the woman who had raised me when no one else would. This is the story of how a quiet life, dismissed as worthless, silenced an entire family with a single document. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up, I always thought Aunt Eleanor was the strange one in our family. In a clan of loud, ambitious socialites who measured success in square footage and luxury cars, she was the anomaly, the professor who lived in the same modest colonial house for 40 years, drove a 10-year-old sedan, and spent her weekends volunteering at the community library. "Your aunt just doesn't understand how the world works," my mother would tell me, with an exaggerated sigh whenever Eleanor declined another lavish family vacation or investment opportunity. "Some people are just afraid of success." As a child, I believed them. After all, what 8-year-old wouldn't be impressed by Uncle Richard's yacht or Cousin Melissa's summer home in the Hamptons? Eleanor's life seemed painfully ordinary by comparison. Grading papers at her dining room table, tending to her garden, and reading books that nobody else in the family had heard of. When my parents died suddenly in a car accident when I was 12, the family assumed my grandparents or one of my wealthy uncles would take me in. Instead, it was Eleanor who stepped forward, quietly informing them that she would be my guardian. "Rebecca will live with me," she had said simply, as if it were already decided. "I have the space and the time." "On a professor's salary?" my Uncle Richard had scoffed. "How will you give her the life she deserves?" Eleanor had merely looked at him with those steady gray eyes that never seemed to miss anything. "I suppose that depends on what one believes she deserves." Living with Aunt Eleanor wasn't what I expected. There were no lavish shopping trips or expensive summer camps like my cousins enjoyed. Instead, there were quiet dinners where she asked about my day and actually listened to the answers. There were weekends spent volunteering at animal shelters and homeless centers. There were long walks where she taught me to identify every tree and bird we passed. "Life isn't about accumulation, Rebecca," she would tell me. "It's about attention." I didn't understand what she meant then. I was too busy feeling embarrassed about my second-hand clothes and our modest holidays while the rest of the family jetted off to exotic locations. Every family gathering was an exercise in subtle humiliation, with relatives offering thinly veiled pity about my circumstances. "If you ever need anything, Rebecca," they would say, shooting pointed looks at Eleanor, "anything at all, you just let us know." Eleanor never seemed bothered by their comments. She would simply smile and continue whatever conversation she was having, refusing to rise to their bait. As I grew older, I began to notice things about my aunt that I had missed before. How students from decades past would stop her on the street to tell her how she had changed their lives. How her colleagues spoke of her with a reverence that bordered on awe. How she could quote poetry from memory and explain complex philosophical concepts in ways that made them seem like common sense. By the time I was in high school, I had stopped feeling embarrassed about living with Eleanor. I had started to realize that there was a quiet power in her simplicity, a deliberate choice in her modest lifestyle that had nothing to do with fear or failure. "Your aunt is wasting her potential," my Uncle Richard told me once at a family Christmas party, his words slightly slurred from too much expensive scotch. "She could have been dean by now if she had any ambition at all." I remember looking across the room at Eleanor, who was deep in conversation with the caterer's assistant, treating the young woman with the same respect she showed to university presidents and distinguished scholars. "I think she's exactly where she wants to be," I had replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Uncle Richard had laughed. "That's the problem with Eleanor. She's infected you with her mediocrity. You could be so much more, Rebecca." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eleanor never pushed me toward any particular path. When I expressed interest in medicine, she took me to shadow doctors at the local hospital where she volunteered. When I later decided on law school instead, She helped me research programs without a single comment about the change in direction. "The point isn't the destination," she would say. "It's making sure you're walking your own path for your own reasons." I was in my second year of law school when Eleanor was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. Terminal. She took the news with the same quiet dignity she approached everything else, refusing extraordinary measures and choosing instead to spend her remaining time at home. "I've had a good life," she told me when I begged her to try experimental treatments. "I've done what I came here to do." "Which is what?" I had demanded, angry at what I saw as her resignation. "Live in the same house for 40 years? Grade papers? What exactly have you accomplished that's so fulfilling?" She hadn't been offended by my outburst. Instead, she'd taken my hand and said, "When you're ready, you'll find my journals in the attic. Perhaps they'll answer that question better than I can right now." The family descended like vultures when word got out about Eleanor's condition. Suddenly, relatives who hadn't visited in years were stopping by with casseroles and concerned expressions, their eyes scanning the modest home as if mentally cataloging its contents. "Such a shame," they would say within Eleanor's hearing. "So much potential, never realized." Eleanor received them all with the same gentle courtesy, offering tea and listening to their stories with genuine interest. Only I saw how these visits exhausted her. How she would collapse into her armchair after they left, eyes closed against the pain that was steadily consuming her. "Why do you let them talk to you like that?" I asked her one evening after a particularly painful visit from Uncle Richard and his wife. "They've never understood you, never appreciated anything about you. Why be so kind to them now?" Eleanor had opened her eyes then, and for a moment, I glimpsed something I'd never seen before, a flash of steel beneath the gentleness. "Kindness isn't weakness, Rebecca. Sometimes it's the strongest choice you can make." She died on a Tuesday morning in early spring, with the first daffodils just beginning to bloom in her garden. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath, so quietly it was as if she were simply slipping from one room into another. The hospice nurse who had been with us for the last week touched my shoulder gently. "She was ready," she said softly. "Some people know exactly when it's time to go." The funeral was held 3 days later. I had expected a small affair, perhaps a few colleagues from the university, some former students, the neighbors who had brought over homemade bread every Sunday for as long as I could remember. Instead, the chapel was packed to overflowing. People stood in the aisles and outside the doors, straining to hear the service. Former students, colleagues, community members, people from the various charitable organizations where Eleanor had volunteered, they all came to pay their respects. My family sat in the front row, visibly confused by the turnout. I had no idea Eleanor knew so many people. I overheard my cousin Melissa whisper to her husband, "Do you think they're all from the university?" One by one, people rose to speak about Eleanor, how she had helped them through difficult times, how her quiet guidance had shaped their lives, how her seemingly small actions had created ripples that transformed entire communities. A former student, now a renowned surgeon, spoke of how Eleanor had paid his tuition anonymously when his scholarship fell through. A local business owner described how Eleanor had spent every Saturday for 5 years teaching his nonverbal daughter to read when the schools had given up. The mayor himself stood to talk about Eleanor's instrumental role in establishing the town's homeless shelter and literacy program. With each story, I watched my family's expressions shift from confusion to disbelief. This wasn't the Eleanor they thought they knew, the quiet, unambitious sister who had settled for a professor's life. This was someone else entirely, someone whose influence extended far beyond what any of them had imagined. When the service ended, we gathered at the cemetery for the burial. It was there, as the casket was being lowered into the ground, that the whispers began. "All that community work is nice," Uncle Richard muttered to his son. "But what did it amount to in the end? No advancement, no real achievements, just a lot of people who'll forget her in a month." "Such a waste of a brilliant mind," Aunt Patricia added with a sigh. "She could have written books, been a department head. Instead, she spent her life reading to children and grading undergraduate papers." "And what about Rebecca?" Cousin Melissa asked, glancing at me with poorly disguised curiosity. "Eleanor wasn't exactly frugal with her education. There can't be much left for an inheritance." I stood there, listening to them dissect and dismiss Eleanor's life as if she had never mattered at all. As if the hundreds of people who had packed the chapel to honor her had somehow been mistaken about her worth. I wanted to scream at them, to force them to see what was so obvious to everyone else, that Eleanor's life had been extraordinary, precisely because she had chosen to invest in people rather than prestige. But I knew that would not be what Eleanor would have wanted. She never felt the need to defend herself in life. I wouldn't start on her behalf in death. Instead, I simply said, "The reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow at Eleanor's attorney's office. You're all invited to attend." They exchanged glances, their interest obviously piqued. "A formal reading?" Uncle Richard asked. "That seems rather dramatic for Eleanor." "Those were her instructions," I replied, keeping my expression neutral. In truth, I was as curious as they were. Eleanor had never discussed her financial affairs with me, beyond ensuring that my education was fully funded. I knew she lived comfortably but modestly on her professor's salary and whatever family money she might have inherited. But a formal reading with the entire family present? That didn't seem like Eleanor's style at all. The next day, we gathered in the wood-paneled conference room of Harrington and Associates, the law firm that had apparently been handling Eleanor's affairs for decades. My family arrived in full force, dressed in designer morning clothes that seemed more appropriate for a business meeting than a will reading. They sat around the large table, making small talk about property values and investment opportunities, barely acknowledging the reason we were all there. Mr. Harrington himself entered the room precisely at 10 a.m. He was an older gentleman with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, who carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen every type of family drama unfold in this very room. "Thank you all for coming," he said, placing a thick folder on the table. Dr. Eleanor Montgomery left very specific instructions about how this meeting should proceed. Uncle Richard cleared his throat impatiently. "We all have busy schedules, Mr. Harrington. Perhaps we could move this along." Mr. Harrington looked at him over the rim of his glasses. "Of course, Mr. Montgomery. Time is precious, as your sister well understood." He opened the folder and removed a sealed envelope. "Before we address the distribution of assets, Dr. Montgomery requested that I read this letter to all of you." He broke the seal and unfolded several pages of Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. The room fell silent as he began to read. "To my family, if you are hearing this, then I have completed my journey. First, I must thank Rebecca for being the daughter of my heart, if not my body. Your presence in my life was its greatest blessing. To the rest of my family, I leave this explanation, though I doubt many of you have wondered about the choices that have so often been the subject of your disapproval. You have spent decades measuring my life against a standard of success I never valued, finding it wanting because it lacked the accumulation of titles, properties, and prestige that you hold dear. You saw a woman who never married, who lived in the same modest house for 40 years, who chose teaching undergraduates over pursuing prestigious research positions. You saw someone who failed to leverage family connections, who declined lucrative opportunities, who spent her free time with those you deemed unimportant. In short, you saw a life wasted. What you never saw, what you never asked about, were the reasons behind these choices. You never questioned why I chose to live as I did, assuming it was due to some deficiency of ambition or courage rather than a deliberate philosophy. You never wondered what I might be building that couldn't be displayed at charity galas or featured in alumni magazines. The truth is simple. I inherited our grandfather's entire fortune when I was 30 years old. At this, there was an audible gasp from around the table. Our grandfather, William Montgomery, had been a legendary investor whose wealth was rumored to have been substantial, though the exact figure had never been disclosed to the family. The assumption had always been that his estate had been divided equally among his children, Eleanor's father and his siblings, who had then passed their portions down to their own heirs. Mr. Harrington continued reading. Grandfather left his entire estate to me because, as he wrote in his own will, I was the only one who understood the responsibility of wealth rather than the privilege of it. This was not information I chose to share with the family, as I had already witnessed how money had distorted your perceptions and priorities. Instead, I established the Montgomery Foundation, an organization that has operated anonymously for the past 35 years, providing educational opportunities, healthcare access, and community development in underserved areas across the country and abroad. Every decision I made, from living modestly to teaching rather than publishing, from declining prestigious positions to spending my weekends volunteering, was in service to this work. The foundation that bears our family name, though you never knew of its existence, has funded the education of over 15,000 students, built 37 community health centers, established literacy programs in over 200 communities, and provided emergency relief after countless natural disasters. This is what I chose to build with my life, not a monument to myself, but a channel through which resources could flow to where they were most needed. I never felt the need to defend these choices to you because, frankly, I was answering to a different standard of success, one measured in lives changed rather than assets acquired. While you were accumulating vacation homes and luxury vehicles, I was watching communities transform. While you were climbing corporate ladders, I was building bridges for others to cross. I am not sharing this now to shame you, though I imagine some of you may feel that way. I am sharing it because perhaps, at the end of a life, there is value in truth. And the truth is that I was never the family failure. I was simply running a different race entirely. Mr. Harrington paused, looking up at the stunned faces around the table before continuing. As for my estate, it is distributed as follows. The Montgomery Foundation will continue its work under the direction of a board that has been prepared for this transition. My home and personal possessions go to my niece, Rebecca, along with a trust sufficient to complete her education and establish herself securely in whatever path she chooses. To the rest of my family, I leave this challenge. Take 1 month of your life, 30 days, and devote it entirely to serving others without recognition or reward. Volunteer at a shelter, teach someone to read, sit with the dying, feed the hungry. Do it quietly without posting on social media or mentioning it at dinner parties. At the end of that month, if you have completed this challenge, the foundation will make a donation of $100,000 in your name to the charity of your choice. This is not a punishment or a bribe. It is an invitation to experience what I discovered long ago, that a life of purpose is its own reward, far richer than any material wealth could ever be. Whether you accept this invitation is, of course, entirely up to you. With love and hope for each of you, Eleanor Montgomery. The silence that followed Mr. Harrington's reading was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if Eleanor herself had walked into the room and rendered everyone speechless. I looked around at my family's faces. Shock, disbelief, and something that looked suspiciously like shame flickered across their features. Uncle Richard's normally florid complexion had gone pale. Cousin Melissa was staring at her manicured hands as if seeing them for the first time. Aunt Patricia's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound. Mr. Harrington closed the folder with deliberate care. That concludes the reading of Dr. Montgomery's letter. Now regarding the specific distributions outlined in her will— Wait, Uncle Richard interrupted, his voice hoarse. Are you telling us that Eleanor was running a multi-million-dollar foundation all this time? That she had access to our grandfather's entire fortune? Mr. Harrington adjusted his glasses. The Montgomery Foundation currently manages assets in excess of $2–3 billion, Mr. Montgomery. Your sister was its founder and executive director, though she drew no salary for that position. She lived entirely on her professor's income. Another wave of stunned silence washed over the room. $2–3 billion. The number seemed to hang in the air like an accusation. But why wouldn't she tell us? Aunt Patricia finally managed. Why live like she did when she had access to that kind of money? It doesn't make any sense. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mr. Harrington glanced at me, and something in his expression suggested he'd had this exact conversation with Eleanor more than once. Dr. Montgomery believed that wealth was a responsibility, not a privilege, he said simply. She chose to live in accordance with that belief. Uncle Richard's shock was quickly morphing into indignation. This is absurd. She let us believe she was struggling all these years. She accepted our help, our concern. Did she? I heard myself ask, surprising everyone, including myself. When did Eleanor ever ask any of you for help? When did she ever indicate she was struggling? Well, Uncle Richard trailed off, clearly searching his memory for an example that wasn't there. She didn't. I continued, feeling decades of quiet observation crystallizing into clarity. You all assumed she was struggling because she didn't live the way you thought she should, She never corrected you because your assumptions weren't her concern. Cousin Melissa leaned forward, her expression calculating. So what happens to the foundation now? Who controls it? Mr. Harrington consulted his notes. As per Dr. Montgomery's instructions, the foundation will continue under the direction of its existing board, which includes professionals from various fields who shared her vision. Ms. Rebecca Montgomery has been named as a board member, should she choose to accept the position. All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of their gazes, suddenly respectful, suddenly interested, and recognized it for what it was. Not genuine connection, but the same materialistic valuation they had always applied to relationships. I was no different in their eyes than I had been yesterday. I was simply attached to something they now deemed valuable. The foundation's work will continue uninterrupted, Mr. Harrington continued, seemingly oblivious to the shifting dynamics in the room. Dr. Montgomery planned her succession meticulously. She left nothing to chance. Of course she hadn't. That had always been Eleanor's way. Quiet, methodical, thinking 10 steps ahead while everyone else was focused on immediate gratification. How had none of us truly seen her? The meeting continued with Mr. Harrington detailing the specific bequests. Eleanor's modest home and all its contents came to me, along with a trust that would not only complete my education but provide substantial security beyond it. Various personal items were designated for former students and colleagues, her collection of first-edition poetry for her department's library, her piano to the community center where she had taught free music lessons, her gardening tools to the neighborhood cooperative garden she had helped establish. To each family member she left a single item of personal significance along with a handwritten note explaining its meaning. Uncle Richard received her father's pocket watch, which he had always coveted, along with a note reminding him that time was the one commodity that couldn't be hoarded or leveraged. Aunt Patricia was given Eleanor's mother's pearl necklace with a note about how true beauty lay in character rather than adornment. Cousin Melissa received Eleanor's well-worn copy of Thoreau's Walden, with passages about simplicity and purpose highlighted throughout. Small bequests, in material terms. Invaluable, if they chose to see the meaning behind them. As the meeting concluded, I watched my family members file out of the conference room, each lost in their own thoughts. They moved differently now, slower, less certain, as if the ground beneath them had shifted. Perhaps it had. Learning that the person you had dismissed and pitied for decades had actually been living a life of extraordinary impact and purpose while you chased material wealth. That was the kind of revelation that could upend a person's entire worldview. Mr. Harrington asked me to stay behind after the others had left. When we were alone, he removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, suddenly looking more human and less like the formal attorney he had presented himself as during the reading. "Your aunt was a remarkable woman, Rebecca," he said, his professional tone giving way to genuine warmth. "I had the privilege of working with her for over 30 years. The world is poorer for her loss." "You knew her well," I said. It wasn't a question. "As well as anyone could, I suppose." Eleanor kept her own counsel for the most part. But yes, I considered her a friend as well as a client. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Did she ever regret it?" I asked, voicing the question that had been forming since the reading. Living the way she did when she could have had so much more? Did she ever wish she had used some of that money for herself? Mr. Harrington smiled, a gentle expression that suggested he had expected this question. "I asked her that myself once, many years ago. Would you like to know what she said?" I nodded, hungry for any insight into the woman who had raised me. The woman who, I was beginning to realize, I had never fully understood despite living under her roof for a decade. She said, "Henry, I have everything I need and nothing I don't." Can you imagine a greater luxury than that? He shook his head slightly, the memory clearly still vivid. I've represented billionaires who are miserable, always grasping for more. Eleanor was the wealthiest person I've ever known, and I don't mean financially. As I drove back to Eleanor's house, my house now, I supposed, those words echoed in my mind. I had everything I need, and nothing I don't. Such a simple statement, yet so radical in a world that constantly told us we needed more, better, newer, different. The house looked exactly as it always had when I pulled into the driveway. the white colonial with black shutters, the garden just beginning to come alive with spring, the porch swing where Eleanor and I had spent countless evenings in conversation. But now I saw it through new eyes. This hadn't been the home of someone who couldn't afford better. It had been the deliberate choice of a woman who understood what better truly meant. Inside, everything was just as Eleanor had left it. Her reading glasses still lay on the side table next to her favorite armchair. Her mug, the chipped blue one she had refused to replace despite my offers to buy her a new set, still sat on the kitchen counter. The house smelled of books and the lavender sachets she tucked into drawers and closets. It smelled like home. I moved through the room slowly, running my fingers over familiar surfaces, seeing each object with new understanding. The furniture wasn't old because Eleanor couldn't afford to replace it. It was old because it was well made, comfortable, and served its purpose perfectly. The walls weren't sparsely decorated because art was a luxury. They featured carefully chosen pieces that held meaning. Photographs of students at graduation, a watercolor from a local artist whose work Eleanor had championed, a framed letter from a renowned poet thanking Eleanor for her insightful analysis of his early work. In her study, I found the key to the attic tucked into the corner of her desk drawer, just where she had always kept it. Remember her words from those final weeks. "When you're ready, you'll find my journals in the attic." The stairs creaked familiarly as I climbed to the attic, a space I had rarely entered during my years in the house. Eleanor had always respected my privacy, and I had extended her the same courtesy. The attic was cool and dim, with afternoon light filtering through a small round window at the far end. Dust motes danced in the sunbeam, and the air smelled of cedar and old paper. Against the wall, beneath the window, stood an old steamer trunk. I recognized it as the one Eleanor had brought with her from her own childhood home, supposedly containing mementos and keepsakes. I had never seen it opened. The key from her desk drawer fit perfectly into the lock. Inside, neatly arranged, were dozens of leather-bound journals, each labeled with a year. They spanned more than 4 decades. Eleanor's entire adult life, meticulously documented. Beneath the journals lay folders containing what appeared to be reports, photographs, and correspondence related to the Montgomery Foundation's work around the world. I lifted out the earliest journal, dated the year Eleanor turned 21, the year I realized that she would have finished her undergraduate studies. Opening to the first page, I began to read. "Today I met with grandfather's attorney. I still cannot fully comprehend what he has done, entrusting his entire fortune to me. The responsibility is overwhelming. Mother and father will be furious when they learn they have been bypassed, as will the aunts and uncles." Grandfather's letter explained his reasoning, that he has watched all of us closely, and determined that I alone understand that wealth is meant to flow through us, not to us. He wrote that money is like water. Hoarded, it grows stagnant and toxic. Channeled properly, it brings life wherever it flows. I am terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. What does one do with such opportunity, such responsibility? Grandfather's letter suggested I take time to contemplate, to travel, to learn about the world's true needs before making any decisions about how to proceed. I think this is wise counsel. I have accepted a teaching position in Ecuador for the next year. I will live simply, observe carefully, and listen to those whose needs are greatest. This seems the only appropriate first step. I turned page after page, following Eleanor's journey as she spent that year living among people whose daily struggles would have been unimaginable to our privileged family. She wrote of children walking miles for education, of mothers creating miracles from meager resources, of communities supporting one another in ways her wealthy upbringing had never exposed her to. When she returned, she began creating what would become the Montgomery Foundation, starting small with scholarships and community programs, gradually expanding as she learned more about effective philanthropy. All while living her seemingly ordinary life as a professor, never once advertising her work or seeking recognition. The journals documented her struggles with our family's persistent misunderstanding of her choices, their condescension, their pity. Early entries showed hurt and frustration at their inability to see beyond material measures of success. Later, this gave way to a kind of peaceful acceptance, even amusement at the irony of being considered the family failure, while quietly overseeing work that transformed thousands of lives. I read about her decision to take me in after my parents' death, not out of obligation but out of genuine belief that she could provide me with something more valuable than the materialistic upbringing my parents' siblings would have given me. Rebecca arrived today with 2 suitcases and eyes full of grief. She had written, "Richard offered to take her, as did Patricia, both making comments about my limited means and modest lifestyle being unsuitable for a child accustomed to more. They see only what is visible, the size of a house, the brand of clothes, the trappings of status. They cannot see what matters, stability, presence, purpose. I will give Rebecca time to mourn, space to become, and most importantly, the freedom to discover her own definition of a life well lived. This is a wealth my brothers and sisters, for all their financial success, cannot offer." Tears blurred my vision as I read those words, written during those first difficult months when I had been so certain she had taken me in out of duty rather than choice. How wrong I had been, how wrong we had all been about Eleanor. The sound of the doorbell pulled me from my reading. Reluctantly, I closed the journal and made my way downstairs, finding Uncle Richard standing on the porch. He looked different somehow, diminished, uncertain, his usual commanding presence subdued. "Rebecca," he said when I opened the door. "May I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside to let him enter. He stood awkwardly in the entryway, looking around as if seeing the house for the first time. "I've been thinking about what Eleanor wrote in her letter," he said finally, "about how none of us ever asked her about her choices. And she was right. I never did. I just assumed that your way was the only way to live a meaningful life." I finished for him. He nodded, uncharacteristically humble. "Something like that." He took a deep breath. "I'm not good at this, admitting I was wrong. But I was wrong about Eleanor. Spectacularly wrong, it seems. I didn't disagree, but I didn't feel the need to twist the knife either. Uncle Richard had spent a lifetime measuring people by a single yardstick, learning that the sister he had dismissed had actually been living at a level of purpose and impact he had never achieved. That was punishment enough. "Did you know?" he asked suddenly. "About the foundation, the money? Did she tell you?" I shook my head. "No, Eleanor never spoke about it. I think she wanted me to form my own values without the distortion that kind of wealth can create. She was giving me the freedom to define success for myself." "And have you defined it for yourself?" I considered the question. "I'm still working on it. But I know it has nothing to do with accumulation or status. Eleanor taught me that much." Uncle Richard nodded slowly. "She mentioned a challenge in her letter. 30 days of service." He looked uncomfortable, like a man trying on clothes that didn't quite fit. "I'm thinking of doing it. Not for the money. God knows I don't need another tax write-off. But because—" He trailed off, seemingly unable to articulate his reasoning. "Because you want to understand," I suggested. "You want to see what Eleanor saw?" "Yes," he said, looking relieved at my understanding. "Exactly that." We talked for a while longer, the most genuine conversation I'd ever had with my uncle. As he was leaving, he paused at the door. "Your aunt lived an extraordinary life," he said quietly. "I just never had the wisdom to recognize it." After he left, I returned to the attic and the journals. I spent the rest of the day and well into the night reading Eleanor's words. Following her journey across decades of purposeful living, I learned about projects she had initiated that had grown into movements, about lives that had been transformed through her quiet intervention, about the careful thought she put into every decision, about how resources should be allocated to create maximum positive impact. In one of the later journals, I found an entry that stopped me cold. It was dated just after my law school graduation, where Eleanor had sat quietly in the audience, applauding with understated pride as I received my degree. "Watched Rebecca graduate today. She has grown into a woman of such substance and clarity. I see in her the same questioning spirit that has guided my own life. The unwillingness to accept conventional measures of success without examination, the instinct to look beyond surface appearances to underlying truth. I have not told her about the foundation or the inheritance. Perhaps this was selfish of me, a desire to be loved for myself rather than my resources. Or perhaps it was the greatest gift I could give her, the chance to become herself without the distorting influence of extreme wealth. Soon enough she will know everything. I have made arrangements for after my passing. My hope is that she will understand the choices I made, though she may resent me for keeping her in the dark. Either way, I have faith in her judgment. She will use what comes to her wisely, because she has already learned the most important lesson, that a life's value lies not in what you accumulate, but in what you give away. I closed the journal, overwhelmed by emotion. Eleanor had seen me, truly seen me, in a way no one else ever had, not as an extension of herself or a project to be shaped, but as a person becoming. She had given me the space to define my own path, while quietly modeling a life of extraordinary purpose. In the days that followed, more revelations came. Former students and colleagues stopped by with stories about Eleanor I had never heard. I learned that she had personally funded medical treatments for the child of a university custodian, had quietly paid off the mortgage of a colleague facing foreclosure, had established anonymous scholarships for dozens of promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds. None of these acts had been performed with fanfare or recognition. They were simply the natural expressions of a woman who had understood that wealth, whether of money, knowledge, or time, was meant to flow outward rather than to be hoarded. My family members each responded to the revelation of Eleanor's true circumstances in their own ways. Some, like Uncle Richard, seemed genuinely shaken into reevaluation. Others quickly reverted to form, approaching me with transparent overtures of sudden familial closeness that had everything to do with my new position as a Foundation board member, and nothing to do with genuine connection. As for me, I spent weeks sorting through Eleanor's papers, meeting with Foundation staff, and gradually coming to understand the scope of the work she had built over decades. It was humbling and inspiring in equal measure. At night, I continued reading her journals, getting to know my aunt in death in ways I never had in life. 1 month after the funeral, Mr. Harrington contacted me to say that several family members had completed Eleanor's 30-day challenge and were eligible to direct donations to charities of their choice. Uncle Richard had spent his month volunteering at a veterans center. Cousin Melissa had taught art at a women's shelter. Even Aunt Patricia had participated, reading to elderly patients at a nursing home. They all reported the same thing. Mr. Harrington told me with a slight smile that it was far more difficult and far more rewarding than they had anticipated. Eleanor knew exactly what she was doing with that challenge, I replied. She was giving them a taste of what had sustained her all these years. Indeed, he agreed, your aunt was playing the long game as always. The Montgomery Foundation's headquarters occupied a converted warehouse in the industrial district of the city. A deliberate choice, I would later learn, meant to minimize overhead and keep the Foundation's work grounded in the communities it served. From the outside, the building was unremarkable. Red brick, large windows, a simple sign that read Montgomery Foundation in understated lettering. Inside was another story entirely. As I walked through the doors for the first time as a board member, I was struck by the energy of the place. People moved with purpose, engaged in animated discussions around communal tables, their faces lit with the particular intensity that comes from doing work that matters. The walls were covered not with expensive art, but with photographs documenting projects around the world. Schools being built, community gardens flourishing, medical clinics serving remote villages. These weren't publicity shots. They were visual reminders of why the Foundation existed. "Rebecca," a voice called, and I turned to see a woman approaching with an outstretched hand. "I'm Maya Chen, the Foundation's executive director. I worked closely with your aunt for over 15 years. We're all so pleased you've decided to join the board." Maya was perhaps 50, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and the kind of lined face that spoke of a life spent outdoors. She wore simple, practical clothes and no jewelry except for a wooden bracelet that looked handmade. Something about her reminded me of Eleanor, not in appearance, but in the quiet confidence with which she carried herself. "Thank you for having me," I said, shaking her hand. Though I'll admit I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of this. A month ago, I thought my aunt was just a university professor who lived modestly. Now I'm discovering she was essentially running a multi-billion-dollar philanthropic organization in her spare time. Maya smiled. Eleanor never saw it as spare time. This was her life's work. Teaching was equally important to her. She believed in the power of education to transform lives, but this foundation was her vision made manifest. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Why didn't she ever talk about it? I asked, a question that had been haunting me since the reading of the will. All those years I lived with her, and she never once mentioned any of this. Maya gestured for me to follow her, and we walked through the open workspace toward a conference room at the back. Eleanor believed that true giving should be anonymous, she explained as we walked. She felt that attaching her name to the foundation's work would shift the focus from the communities being served to herself as the benefactor. She didn't want gratitude or recognition, she wanted change. But I was her family, I said, unable to keep a hint of hurt from my voice. She raised me. Maya's expression softened. She struggled with that decision, Rebecca. I know she did, but she also believed that growing up with the knowledge of extreme wealth can distort a person's development of values and identity. She wanted you to form your own relationship with money and success, untainted by the knowledge that you were connected to billions of dollars. We reached the conference room, which was dominated by a large round table made of reclaimed wood. The walls here were lined with bookshelves filled with volumes on economics, development, social justice, and philanthropy. One entire section was dedicated to books written by Foundation grant recipients, memoirs, academic works, and literature emerging from communities the Foundation had supported. Eleanor left something for you, Maya said, retrieving a sealed envelope from a drawer in the conference table. She asked that I give it to you when you first came to the Foundation. I took the envelope, my fingers tracing my name written in Eleanor's familiar handwriting. The paper was high quality, the kind she used for her most important correspondence. I hesitated before opening it, suddenly nervous about what final message my aunt might have left for me. Would you like some privacy? Maya asked gently. I nodded, grateful for her perceptiveness. Yes, please. Just a few minutes. Take all the time you need, she said, moving toward the door. When you're ready, I'll give you a tour and introduce you to the team. She closed the door quietly behind her. Alone in the conference room, I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then you've come to the Foundation and I am gone. First, let me say how proud I am of the woman you've become. You have grown into someone of remarkable character and discernment, qualities far more rare and valuable than any material success could ever be. I owe you an explanation for my silence about this part of my life. Perhaps it was wrong of me to keep you in the dark, and if you feel hurt or betrayed by this omission, I understand completely. My decision was not made lightly. When you came to live with me after your parents' death, you were already forming ideas about wealth and status based on your upbringing in a family that measured worth in material terms. I watched you struggle with the adjustment to our more modest lifestyle, saw your embarrassment when friends visited our simple home, noticed your discomfort when family gatherings became showcases for your cousins' privileges. I could have easily changed all that, provided you with the same luxuries, the same status symbols, the same path of least resistance. But I asked myself, what would truly serve you best in the long term? Would it be a childhood of material abundance and the sense of entitlement that often accompanies it? Or would it be the chance to develop resilience, to form values based on substance rather than appearance, to learn the difference between what we want and what we need? I chose the latter, hoping that by the time you learned about the Foundation and the wealth behind it, you would have developed the wisdom to use it well, not as a source of personal comfort or status, but as a tool for creating the change you wish to see in the world. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Foundation is now partly yours to steward, should you choose to accept that responsibility. You are under no obligation to do so. You may take your place on the board and become actively involved in directing its work, or you may choose a different path entirely. The resources that have been set aside for you personally are yours regardless, with no strings attached. What I hope, however, is that you will find in this work the same profound fulfillment that I did. There is a joy in purposeful giving that cannot be found in any amount of acquiring. There is a richness in meaningful work that makes even the most luxurious lifestyles seem hollow by comparison. Whatever you decide, know that my love for you has always been unconditional. You were the daughter of my heart, Rebecca. Being your guardian was one of the greatest privileges of my life. With all my love, Eleanor. I sat there for a long time after reading the letter, tears streaming down my face. The hurt I had felt at being kept in the dark was still there, but it was tempered now by understanding. Eleanor had made a difficult choice out of love, wanting to give me something far more valuable than wealth, the chance to develop character untainted by privilege. And hadn't she succeeded? I thought about the values that guided my own life now, the commitment to justice that had led me to law school, the preference for substance over show, the instinctive skepticism toward materialism. These weren't qualities I had been born with. They were the result of Eleanor's quiet influence, her consistent modeling of a life guided by purpose rather than acquisition. When I finally emerged from the conference room, Maya was waiting patiently. If she noticed my reddened eyes, she was tactful enough not to mention it. "Ready for that tour?" she asked. I nodded, tucking Eleanor's letter carefully into my bag. "Yes, I want to understand everything about what she built." The tour was eye-opening. The foundation operated with remarkable efficiency, with administrative costs kept to an absolute minimum. Instead of a hierarchical structure, it functioned as a collaborative community, where decisions were made through a careful process that centered the voices of those being served. Eleanor insisted that we never impose solutions from above. Maya explained as we walked through the project planning area, where maps and diagrams covered the walls. Every initiative begins by asking communities what they actually need, not what we think they should have. We stopped at a large world map dotted with colored pins, each representing a project. "This is our current portfolio," Maya said. "Education initiatives in blue, healthcare in red, environmental sustainability in green, economic development in yellow." The map was dense with pins, each representing lives being changed through Eleanor's vision. I was struck by the breadth of the Foundation's work, from microfinance programs in rural India to urban gardening initiatives in Detroit, from mobile health clinics in Appalachia to educational technology programs in sub-Saharan Africa. How did she manage all of this while teaching full-time? I asked, awed by the scope. "Eleanor had an extraordinary gift for finding the right people and empowering them," Maya replied. "She built systems that didn't depend on her daily presence. And she was rigorous about focusing on what mattered most. She didn't waste time on things that didn't directly serve our mission." Throughout the day, I met the Foundation's staff, a diverse group of people united by their commitment to the work. Many had been recruited directly by Eleanor, often from unexpected backgrounds. The finance director had previously been a teacher in a low-income school district. The head of healthcare initiatives was a former nurse who had worked in conflict zones. The educational program director had grown up in one of the first communities the Foundation had served. Eleanor believed lived experience was the most valuable qualification, Maya explained. She hired people who understood the problems we were trying to solve because they had faced them personally. By the end of the day, my head was spinning with information, but my heart felt full in a way it hadn't since before Eleanor's diagnosis. Here was the missing piece of her life, the purpose that had animated her, the work that had given her such quiet confidence and contentment despite the family's dismissal of her choices. "There's one more thing I want to show you," Maya said as we finished our tour. She led me to a simple wooden door at the end of a hallway. This was Eleanor's office. She didn't use it often. She preferred to be out on the floor with everyone else. But it's where she did her most important thinking. The office was small and unpretentious, with the desk facing the window rather than the door, positioned to catch the natural light rather than to impress visitors. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes whose well-worn spines spoke of frequent use. A comfortable reading chair sat in the corner, with a small side table holding a lamp and a stack of notebooks. "We've left it exactly as it was," Maya said. "Eleanor was clear that this space should be available to you whenever you wanted it." I moved around the room slowly, taking in the details. On the desk sat a framed photograph I recognized, Eleanor and me at my law school graduation, both of us smiling into the camera. Beside it was a smooth stone with the word purpose engraved on it, a paperweight I had given her for Christmas years ago. The walls held no awards or certificates. Eleanor had never been one for displays of achievement, but were instead adorned with simple photographs of people whose lives had been touched by the Foundation's work. Children in a newly built school, women gathered around a community well, elders teaching traditional skills to younger generations, healthcare workers serving remote communities. Maya quietly excused herself, leaving me alone in the space that had been Eleanor's sanctuary. I sat in her chair, running my hands over the smooth wood of the desk, trying to absorb some essence of the woman who had shaped my life in ways I was only beginning to understand. On the desk calendar, still open to the month of her passing, I noticed something written on today's date. Rebecca's first board meeting. Trust her judgment. Even from beyond, Eleanor was affirming her confidence in me. The board meeting that afternoon was illuminating. The other members, professors, community organizers, business leaders who shared Eleanor's vision, welcomed me warmly but without condescension. They didn't treat me as Eleanor's charity case or as an inexperienced newcomer to be humored, but as a full and equal member whose perspective was valued. "Eleanor spoke of you often," said Dr. James Wilson, a distinguished economist who had been on the board since its inception. "She believed you would bring fresh insights to our work." "I'm not sure what insights I could possibly offer," I admitted. "I'm still trying to understand the scope of what you're all doing." "That's precisely why your perspective is valuable," said Amara Okafor, the founder of a social enterprise that partnered with the Foundation. "You're seeing everything with fresh eyes, asking questions the rest of us stopped asking long ago because we're too close to the work." The meeting proceeded with thoughtful discussion of ongoing projects, proposals for new initiatives, and careful consideration of how resources should be allocated to create maximum positive impact. I mostly listened, occasionally asking questions that were received with genuine consideration rather than dismissal. By the end of the meeting, I felt something shift inside me, a sense of possibility, of purpose, of belonging to something larger than myself. This was Eleanor's true legacy, not the billions in the Foundation's accounts, but the vision of a world where resources flowed to where they could do the most good, where success was measured in lives improved rather than profits gained. In the weeks that followed, I took a leave of absence from my law firm to immerse myself in the Foundation's work. I visited project sites, read through decades of reports and evaluations, and spent countless hours in conversation with staff and board members, trying to understand the principles that had guided Eleanor's philanthropy. What emerged was a portrait of a woman whose genius lay not in grand gestures or revolutionary ideas, but in patient, persistent application of simple truths. That those closest to problems generally understand them best. That sustainable change requires community ownership. That effective giving means surrendering control rather than imposing conditions. That the measure of success is not donor satisfaction but actual improvement in people's lives. 6 months after Eleanor's passing, I found myself sitting in her garden, my garden now, on a warm summer evening. The daylilies she had planted years ago were in full bloom, their orange trumpets catching the last light of the day. I had spent the afternoon in a board meeting where we had approved funding for a network of community health workers in rural Appalachia, a project Eleanor had been developing for years before her illness. My phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Richard. "Just finished my 2nd month of volunteer work at the Veterans Center. Never thought I'd say this, but I'm considering making it a regular commitment. Something about the work feels necessary." I smiled, imagining Eleanor's reaction to this unexpected development. She had known exactly what she was doing with that 30-day challenge, giving her family a taste of what had sustained her all those years, hoping it might awaken something in them that material success had never satisfied. Not all of them had been transformed, of course. Cousin Melissa had completed her 30 days at the women's shelter, directed her donation to a high-profile arts organization with an annual gala she could attend, and promptly returned to her usual lifestyle. Aunt Patricia had continued her weekly reading at the nursing home but complained frequently about how it interfered with her social calendar. But Uncle Richard's transformation had been genuine and sustained. After completing his initial 30 days, he had continued volunteering, gradually increasing his commitment from once a week to 3 times, developing real relationships with the veterans he served. Recently, he had approached the Foundation about establishing a program to provide legal support for veterans struggling with housing and healthcare access, offering to leverage his connections in the legal community to build a network of pro bono attorneys. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I found Maya standing on the porch holding a manila envelope. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," she said, "but we found something in Eleanor's personal files that I thought you should have right away." Inside the envelope was a journal I hadn't seen before, older than the others I had found in the attic. The cover was worn leather. The pages yellowed with age. Inside, in Eleanor's youthful handwriting, was an account of her grandfather's funeral and the aftermath, the family's shock at learning he had left his fortune to her, their anger and resentment, their attempts to contest the will. "I stand alone today," she had written. "The family has made it clear that if I do not share the inheritance equally among them, I am no longer welcome in their homes or lives. Grandfather warned me this would happen. The true test of character," he wrote in his letter, "is not how one handles adversity, but how one handles advantage." He was right. Money has revealed who they truly are, and perhaps who I am as well. I choose the path he envisioned, even if it means walking it alone. She hadn't walked it alone, though. She had built a community of purpose. A family of choice united not by blood, but by shared vision. And in the end, she had brought me into that family, hoping I would carry forward what she had begun. That night, I sat at Eleanor's desk, my desk now, and began a letter to the Foundation's staff and partners. I had been thinking for months about how to honor Eleanor's legacy while bringing my own perspective to the work. Now, with the discovery of that earliest journal, I understood more clearly what she had been trying to preserve, and what she had hoped I might contribute. Eleanor Montgomery believed that wealth was a responsibility, not a privilege, I wrote. She understood that true wealth lies not in what we accumulate, but in what we make possible for others. As we move forward, we will continue to be guided by her vision while embracing new opportunities to create positive change. Eleanor never wanted monuments or recognition. The only legacy she desired was lives transformed through the thoughtful application of resources she was privileged to steward. In that spirit, I am pleased to announce the establishment of the Eleanor Montgomery Scholarship for first-generation college students, which will provide full funding for young people who, like Eleanor herself, understand that education is not a path to personal enrichment, but a foundation for meaningful contribution to our shared world. I paused, remembering Eleanor's quiet presence, her unwavering focus on what mattered most. She had never sought the spotlight, never claimed credit, never asked for recognition. Her satisfaction had come from the work itself, from knowing that her choices were aligned with her deepest values, that her life was being spent in service to something greater than herself. In her final letter to me, Eleanor had written of the joy in purposeful giving and the richness of meaningful work. Sitting there, in the home she had created, surrounded by the evidence of a life extraordinarily well lived, I finally understood what she had been trying to teach me all along. Success wasn't measured in possessions accumulated or status achieved. It wasn't even measured in recognition received for good works done. True success, the kind that brought genuine fulfillment, lay in the alignment of one's daily choices with one's deepest values. It was found in the quiet satisfaction of living with integrity, of using whatever resources one had, whether money, time, talent, or knowledge, to create positive change in the world. Eleanor hadn't needed our family's approval or understanding to find meaning in her choices. She had known the value of her life's work without external validation. And in the end, that internal compass had guided her to create a legacy far more meaningful than any amount of wealth or status could have provided. As I finished the letter, I realized I was smiling. For years, I had grieved what I perceived as Eleanor's exclusion from the family, her relegation to the margins of our shared history. Now I understood that she had never been marginalized at all. She had simply been walking a different path, one that led not to the hollow achievements our family celebrated, but to the profound fulfillment of a life aligned with purpose. In the quiet of that evening, with Eleanor's garden blooming outside the window and her work continuing through the foundation she had built, I made a promise. Not just to honor her legacy, but to live by the same principles that had guided her extraordinary life. To measure success not by what I acquired, but by what I contributed. To value substance over appearance, impact over recognition, purpose over prestige. The family had mocked what they saw as Eleanor's wasted life, unable to recognize the richness of what she had built. But in the end, it was her vision that endured, her values that continued to create positive change in the world long after she was gone. And that, I realized, was the greatest inheritance she could have left me. Not the material resources that would fund my comfortable future, but the example of a life guided by purpose and animated by love. In living as she had, Eleanor had shown me what true wealth looked like. Now it was up to me to carry that understanding forward, to build on the foundation she had laid with such quiet, persistent courage. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.